Hello, everyone. As Mr. Smart said, my name is Aaron Danowski, and today I want to talk to you guys about a pretty touchy subject, economics. Now, one of the things that I want to get out of the way first refers back to a talk that we watched earlier today. The talk, The Danger of a Single Story by Chimamanda Adichie, talks about the importance of never just relying on one source to understand a problem. Today, I want you guys to take that frame of reference into understanding my talk. As you heard, for the past 2 years, I've spent the bulk of my free time trying to get as far away from the United States as possible, whether that means going to India and learning about the caste system, or going to Cameroon to study international development. And since returning, I've stumbled across a fact that really goes a long way towards helping me explain some of the things that I've seen. And it refers to this topic of economic justice. This fact that I'm about to share with you, I guarantee, will change the lives of every single person in this room and far beyond. The fact is pretty simple. It's 1.6. Now, what does this mean? According to the researchers at the Global Footprint Network, today, the global economy uses 1.6 Earths in order to maintain itself. What does that mean? That means that currently, we're using more renewable resources and depleting land faster than the Earth can regenerate it in a given year. This means that we're also producing more waste and pollution than the Earth can effectively absorb. Now, this leads to things that you've all heard about: deforestation, soil depletion, and yes, climate change and global warming. But here's the real kicker. It's not just that we're currently using 1.6 Earths, it's that by 2030, we're projected to use 2. We're not actually making this any better, we're making it worse. Another part of this picture is that we're not using renewable resources as effectively as we should, but also non-renewable resources. Let's take the oil industry, for example. Oil, natural gas, and other elements that we use to build our modern society, like cement, steel, aluminum, all of these things are finite, but we're using them as if they aren't. In 2012, we produced 17 million metric tons of copper. That was mined in 1 year. Now, to put that into perspective, that's 6 times more than we used in 1950. Not only that, but just a picture of what that scale is like, imagine an Olympic-sized swimming pool. If you close your eyes, you can picture it. It's like the Olympics. Imagine now 759 Olympic-sized swimming pools filled with copper. That's what we extracted in 2012, and that happens year after year after year. This isn't just related to copper. For example, we had 259 million metric tons of aluminum that we took out of the earth in 2012. This is enough to fill 38,370 Olympic-sized pools. And the biggest resource that we pull out of the earth every year is iron, used to make steel. We pulled 3 billion metric tons of iron out of the earth in 2012. These numbers are getting huge, but stay with me. We used 152,478 Olympic-sized pools of iron. Now, okay, it's a lot of numbers, but what does this really mean? Well, I say that this increase in resources is predominantly due to 2 reasons. Number 1, global population has almost tripled in the last 60 years. And we need more resources in order to help more people live quality lives. That makes sense. But the more important thing, I think, is that our standard of living, the quality of life that we've come to expect, has increased over that time, and it's been exported. Now, it's not just millions of Americans that are big houses, fancy cars, and the latest in electronics and appliances. It's also millions of people across Africa, across the Middle East, across not only Europe, but also Latin America and Asia. And this leads to a massive increase in the demand for these non-renewable resources. The third part of this picture is that the resources that we've used are becoming harder and harder to replenish. What does this mean? In the oil industry, this means that we're starting to extract oil from places like the Alberta tar sands, which you see above me. Not only is this one of the biggest industrial projects on Earth ever, it's also one of the dirtiest sources of oil in the world. This is what's referred to as a sacrifice zone in the industry. It's a place that doesn't really need to be preserved as long as it helps lift up the quality of life everywhere else. But we don't often see these kinds of pictures. The same thing is happening here in the US, in North Dakota, where we've started to frack the Bakken Shale Formation. And this leads to an increase in methane leaks, an increase in millions of gallons of poisonous wastewater, and also earthquakes in places where the water is disposed of, in places like Oklahoma. The third thing that we need to think about is also happening up in the Arctic. Deep sea drilling by countries like Russia, Canada, the US, and Sweden are all leading us closer and closer to having a repeat of the Deepwater Horizon's oil spill that happened years ago in the Gulf of Mexico. These are all things that are happening under our noses, and they all point to one simple conclusion. We're using too many resources, and it's unsustainable and increasingly dangerous. So what do we do about it? It's a scary picture, but I'd like to say that if we take the chance to really look at it, it can tell us two really important things that we can act on. Number one, our current lifestyle is unsustainable. We can't continue this level of consumption, and we can't stop thinking of the Earth as infinite. We're starting to run into the limits of what we can extract and what we can expect to be there at the end of the day. We need to start accepting that we're living beyond our means now. Remember that number 1.6? It's not happening in 30 years. It's not happening in 100 years. It's happening today, and it's an issue that we need to address. But number two, and this is a part of my talk, we still have billions of people in poverty. And how do we go about trying to promote this notion of economic justice in order to lift people's quality of life when we can't keep growing? When the resources that we're using to build this won't be available for the world's population. I think it leads to a simple conclusion, and that's that the resources that we use need to be distributed more equally. Now, this doesn't mean governments coming in and taking away your property, but this means thinking about the way that our economic system works in order to ensure that there's enough for everyone, and so that we can truly promote sustainable development. When I talk about economic justice, I refer to this term using the following definition. It's the point at which every person on Earth has the ability to meet their basic needs and can thus push themselves to achieve their human potential. If people don't have that opportunity, we're not giving them the best that this world and this life has to offer. And I think that's an important role that everyone in this room should be excited about helping it to bring about. How can we make that more of a reality when we're using so much today? Well, for starters, I'm going to get down into the trenches and say we need to change the way we think about economics. Since we can't grow forever, since we're already using more now than we can use indefinitely, we need to start thinking about something called a steady state economy. An economy that isn't growing, an economy that doesn't need more resources year over year. Now, this sounds scary because it's contrary to everything that the experts tell us. They tell it, you turn on the TV and you see we need to achieve a certain amount of growth in order to ensure that our economy is stable, that our jobs are safe, and that our kids can have a brighter future. So what would it mean if we embrace the notion that we need to tail off our growth? There's only one kind of economics that I've found in my studies and in my research that addresses this issue, and it's called ecological economics. Ecological economics starts from the assumption that there's a hard limit to the reserves that nature has to offer. It doesn't start from where our current economic system begins, which is that growth needs to be ensured. Growth is inherently unsustainable because we live in a world of hard limits. The economy is a subsection of the broader natural world. And And as long as we think that this can keep growing and growing and growing, what happens when we reach out here? That's what I'm talking about today. This is not a new concept. This is a concept, there have been books written about it, there are experts, it's an emerging field that many actually colleges all around the world are starting to increase education about. It's led by a man named Herman Daly, who is a professor at the University of Maryland and who was the senior economist in the environmental division of the World Bank in the late 80s. He came to the conclusion that rather than talking about growth and growth and growth, we need to start with ecological economics. In order to ensure that we achieve what's called a steady state economy, and granted, let's make it clear, we're talking about this in the developed world, where we already have enough to ensure that everyone has enough. It's just not properly distributed. You need to make sure that the total amount of resources that you use on a given basis doesn't increase year over year. How do you do that? Well, it's a pretty simple equation. The total amount of resources you use is population times consumption per capita. We have to choose. We can't have both. You can't have an increasing population and an increasing standard of living and expect to have a sustainable environment for generations and generations to come. You need to understand that one of those things has to give. We have to relearn that we can't control nature, that human innovation can't always trump what the earth has given us. Yes, we can have incredible technologies that can help the resources go further and help more people. But at a given point, that starts to give way. What I'm saying is that in the next 10 to 20 years, we really need to be thinking hard about what it is that we expect from the economy and how we can ensure that we have a safe, habitable world for my kids and my grandkids. Because at the moment, I don't think that's the kind of world we're living in. So, that's ecological economics. What does this mean for the billions of people that don't have enough right now? Well, the current model of development, promoted by things like the World Bank and the IMF, is predicated on fossil fuels and on the export of raw materials. So most developing countries have what they call a resource curse. And this refers to the fact that if a country has soil, or if they have a lot of minerals that can be extracted, ultimately, there are foreign investors that will go into a place and will generally take the resources and enrich several people, but that won't go towards the sustainable development of the broader society. There's a tension in international development around this issue. If we're moving towards an ecological economics paradigm in the United States and in other developed countries in Western Europe and such, that throws a wrench into the way that development works currently, because we export the materials that we need to transform from developing countries, and it's driven by demand in developed countries. If we have a cap on how many resources we can use, this means that developing countries need to have industries themselves. They need to be able to transform the materials they have with them currently, not have to rely necessarily on brought in from abroad. Luckily, there are organizations that are starting to push this as an alternative to the standard development model. And I was privileged enough to work with one of them this summer. That's where this photo was taken. I worked with an organization called Rebuild Globally, which works in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. And you can see several of the artists there, Jeslie Minouche, and a few of their Yvette and Annette. Basically, what this organization does differently is it says, wait a second. What people in Haiti need is not more aid, it's not more donations, they need jobs. What would happen if we were able to provide jobs to the people who are hurting most? That's what this organization does. What they do is they take a plentiful resource, which happens to be abandoned tires in Haiti. Every 3 months, development organizations require their staff to change the tires on their cars. And oftentimes these tires are discarded and abandoned, and they can be used during riots. People will light fires using them and draw people in, and it can become a very dangerous situation. So what this organization does is they take the tires and they cut out the sidewalls and they turn them into sandals, where the sidewalls of the tires are the soles. Then they buy leather that's developed locally so that they're investing in the infrastructure and the jobs that already exist. And in that way, they're able to provide employment for 20 people. Now these people each will go off and support their families and their friends. 5 of their workers have side businesses in which they employ other people. This is a model that I think is really beginning to develop, and ultimately, it's the key to creating true development in the developing world, not more export of raw materials. Ultimately, I'd like to leave you guys with a few last thoughts. You know the facts. We're at 1.6 Earths today. We're quickly moving towards 2. We're using non-renewable resources faster than ever, and it's becoming more and more dangerous to extract them. The development system that we currently have isn't helping billions of people around the world as much as it could be. So what do? I've chosen that this is the right path, that we need to change the way we think about economics, change the way we need to think about the Earth as having physical limits, and from there, strive to build a just and verdant society. I hope that you will too, and I encourage you to think hard about what does this mean in your day-to-day lives. This isn't an easy change, this isn't a change that's gonna happen overnight, but I would argue it's a necessary change. If you're really focused on sustainability, what do you tell your kids or your grandkids about how to live a full and just life? If you're a student, how do you take these notions, these ideas, and translate them into a career? If you're a professional today, how do these affect your industry, your business? I'm not expecting change tomorrow, but I think that for the good of everyone, we need to start change today. Thank you very much.